Let's dive into the discussions shaping the nation.
Cahir, or Cian Corla, should say, and I formally move the motion.
Thank you, Deputy Twin.
Minister, driving test delays, the length and breadth of the country have reached staggering new peaks. There's 72,414 people now in limbo. That's up 60% on 2022, and there's an increase of 10,000 over the last 3 months. And we take no pleasure in the fact that, again, we've been forced to confront the government on this issue. And I'm sure that every deputy in the House, from every constituency, rural and urban, has been contacted by people facing interminable delays, people who are trapped in outrageously expensive insurance policies, having to pay more and more for driving lessons, who are waiting on jobs, waiting on courses, and there's deep sense of frustration, and they are dependent on a licence and they're waiting for it. They're also frustrated, obviously, with the government's continued failure to address it. It's not a new issue, because this crisis has been rumbling on for years, and it's another example of a litany of failures by Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. And their coalition partners now, the Lowry-led independents, they must own up to their role in sorting this out. After all, many of the government supporting rural independents were highly critical of these delays when they were in opposition, and before they decided to support the government in exchange for the new salary positions and the positions and salary bumps, but they forgot to include this important issue in the programme for government. And I hope they still have the same courage of their convictions when they're sitting on government benches. One particular issue that I want to highlight is the impact that it's having on our young people. As the Minister will know, for many young people, having a licence cannot be considered as just an option. It's an absolute necessity, because public transport is either totally non-existent or entirely unreliable in many areas of rural Ireland. And without a valid licence, young people are prevented from going about their daily lives, they're missing out on attending college, they're unable to take up new jobs, all because they're languishing for months on end on waiting lists. This backlog has also pushed up the cost of learning to drive, because learner drivers are trapped in expensive insurance policies for longer than anticipated, often of average of about €3,000 per year, while they anxiously wait to sit their test. We know that this government is out of touch, but even they must realise that further driving up costs for our young people who can barely afford to make ends meet is hardly the way to entice them to stay in the country. One young constituent of mine in County Kerry has been particularly harmed by the government's failure to get a grip on this. He's the sole carer for his father. He must return every night to look out for him. However, without a licence, he's been forced to choose between attending college and looking after his father. But that's not much of a choice. The government needs to wake up. It's been asleep at the wheel for too long, and I'm calling upon the government to agree to this motion, to adopt it, and to increase resources to meet the demand, to hire more permanent instructors, to review the role and funding of the RSA, and to address the gaps in driving test centres all around the country.
Thank you, Deputy. We'll move now to Deputy Louise O'Hara. That's who I
Louis.
Excuse me.
Louis, yeah.
Excuse me, Louis.
This is a very important motion, given the lengthy delays across the people across the state are facing in securing driving tests. Over 72,000 people are currently waiting. That's an increase of 60% since 2022. And this has been an issue for years, but it really is at crisis point now, and action is needed urgently to address this backlog. We know why we were in the situation. There has been a failure to recruit enough driving test instructors. We've been totally over-reliant on temporary instructors. We don't have enough test centres, and it is clear that the RSA does not have the capacity or the ability to address these backlogs, and they're breaching their own service level agreement. This impacts hugely on people, mostly young people, who need to drive and are missing out on employment and educational opportunities as a result. It particularly impacts those who need a driver's licence to begin a job, the likes of bus drivers, paramedics and so on, who we know are badly needed. It leaves people stranded, particularly those in rural communities who do not have public transport available to them. And I think often this government doesn't understand the reality of life in rural Ireland. We don't have good quality public transport. We don't have buses going by our door every few minutes. We rely on cars to transport ourselves, and that will continue to be the reality for many in rural communities for the foreseeable. Young people in rural communities need to be able to drive. It is critical for their independence and to be able to lead an adult life, but many are being denied that opportunity for months on end. It is not fair or sustainable for them to be left having to rely on lifts from friends or family members to get around, and this is leading to social isolation as well. And this is the same generation that are suffering with the housing crisis and rising costs in terms of education and so on, and they can't also be left stuck at home. They need support to live independent lives, and government must step up to the plate to provide for that. In my own county of Galway, the waiting times for an invitation for a driving test range from 15 to 29 weeks, and we have higher figures in other parts of the state. That's totally unacceptable, and it's causing huge difficulties for young people in my constituency and right across the state. Learning to drive is difficult enough and expensive enough as it is. Learner drivers have to pay outrageous insurance premiums, a lot of money for lessons and so on, and these delays only prolong that. We need to ease the burden on them and support young people who are starting off in their adult life to get the opportunities that driving can present to them. And it's very clear that more resources are needed to meet demand. This means ending the over-reliance on temporary driving instructors and expediting the recruitment of permanent instructors. There must be an urgent review of the RSA's mandate, resourcing and programme of work. Their performance is a key factor in all of this and cannot be ignored. There must be new test centres established, particularly in areas where there are none at present. There are huge gaps in locations, and these must be filled by the RSA as a matter of urgency. And finally, we need some political will from government to ensure that these changes are made and driving tests are easily accessible to those applying for them.
Thank you, Deputy O'Hara. Deputy Johnny Maiden.
Mahara Ceann Comhairle, agus Ara. Ceann Comhairle, in our county of Wexford at this moment of time, if I apply for a driving test, I will get my invite test date for the 25th of August 2025. Then I would have to wait another 3 to 5 weeks after that for my actual driving test date. As of the 21st of the 1st 25, the application volume in County Wexford was 5,643. The volume per centres are Gorey 2,723 and Wexford 2,920. With the estimated weeks to invite being 20 weeks and 25 weeks respectively, and you can add another 3 to 5 weeks onto that. The national figure states there are 72,000 people awaiting driving test. Many rural parts of Wexford people are waiting on the driving test depend totally on family and friends to bring them to their place of employment or education level institutions, as public transport is not an option or in most cases not available. My own constituency, I'll give you 2 prime examples of the burden of incompetence is causing thousands of young people and their families across the whole country. I had a father of two young men who were in their early 20s, both working, both waiting months on end for a driving test. However, that man had to get up at 5:30 a.m. each morning to bring his 2 sons to work. They worked in 2 different locations, which meant a round trip of approximately 60 kilometres. He then had to turn around and go to work himself and repeat the journey when he returned home that evening. Another man who was self-employed, he had to bring his daughter to work at a local village shop about 20 kilometres away, again an early start in the morning and a return trip in the evening. The result was she had to give up her job, as her father's work took him miles away in the opposite direction. Minister, this surely must indicate to you the system is not fit for purpose and is failing. If this were another sort of business, it would be put through a root and branch reform, especially when you consider the exchequer funding is expected to be in the region of almost £1 million this year. And according to the government's revised estimates, the RSA's income are anticipated to reach almost 90 million. People are paying for a good service. Therefore, it is reasonable to expect a top quality service in return. However, this is certainly not the case when you see the huge backlogs. To finish up, I must say how disappointed the people of Wexford are with the recent allocation of road maintenance and road funding of 23,310,000, down almost 150,000 from last year. This despite a full comprehensive engineering report stating that 1/3 of the roads need full reconstruction, estimated to a cost in the region of 190 million. Wexford once again shortchanged.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Joanna Byrne.
Minister, the statutory maximum waiting time for a driving test is 10 weeks and no test centre around the country is meeting that, not even close to it. There is no driving test in Drogheda, the largest town in Ireland, the 6th largest urban centre in the state, the next future city of this country with no driving test centre of its own. People in South Loud and East Meath have to travel to do their driving tests, usually to Navan or Dundalk, but sometimes to Dublin due to waiting times. They have to drive on unfamiliar roads with no local knowledge, and it may be the only time they ever drive those roads. To add to the inconvenience of having to travel for driving tests, the waiting time in Navan Test Centre is 35 weeks. In Dundalk, it's 23 weeks. There are 76 test centres around the country, and in some cases, towns far smaller than Drogheda have 2 test centres. People in Drogheda don't begrudge that, but it is genuinely farcical at this stage that a permanent driving test centre cannot be found in Drogheda, the largest town in the country, after 7 years of searching. Up and down the country, there are driving test centres operating out of offices and rooms in hotels, yet ye can't seem to locate a single building in Drogheda that is suitable for a test centre. According to the RSA, there were 14 sites inspected in Drogheda last year. Of those 14 sites, 7 were deemed not suitable, but no reason was given. In other sites, traffic was given as the reason for not allowing a centre at them. Traffic. Can anyone in the government or the RSA really state with a straight face that there are no traffic issues around any other driving test routes throughout the state? In another one, speed ramps was the reason given. Like, traffic and speed ramps are a fact of life for all drivers. It beggars belief that the RSA wouldn't want drivers to be prepared for them. At present, there are 45,000 people living in Drogheda. As you know, Minister, you don't live too far away from us. The population is set to increase by around 20,000 in the next 5 years under the Northern Environs Plan, with 5,000 new homes forecast and underway. We need a driving test centre to serve the large population in a large geographical area spanning across South Loud and East Meath. If you are to reduce the waiting times I highlighted earlier for driving test centres in Navan and Dundalk, a test centre must be opened in Drogheda as soon as possible. The Government and the RSA need to meet their commitments and provide a test within the statutory waiting time. Drogheda has been sidelined for too long. There are no excuses that will suffice any longer, and a permanent test centre for Drogheda has to become a priority for all stakeholders.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Johnny Quirk.
Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. Minister, the waiting times for a driving test in Meath is a disgraceful situation which the Government have been warned about for years. Many people are waiting up to 35 weeks and in some cases even longer to complete their driving test. This is completely unacceptable. Navan has the longest waiting list in the country with an estimated wait time of 35 weeks for a driving test, and some constituencies waiting even longer. We now have over 72,414 people trapped in limbo, an alarming increase of more than 60% since 2022. In just 3 months, the backlog has ballooned by nearly 10,000. Not a single driving test centre is meeting the statutory maximum waiting time of 10 weeks. Learners have been forced to wait 6 months or more, with some waiting up to 8 months. The repercussions of this backlog are devastating and far-reaching. People of all ages have had to turn down job offers and college placements because they can't obtain their full driving licences, which are often essential for employment and education. Imagine being qualified and ready to work only to be held back by an inefficient system. Students are left stranded, unable to get to college due to a public transport system that cannot meet their needs. How many potential workers are we losing when they are eager to contribute but simply can't drive because of the lengthy driving test waiting list? Those who wish to return from America, for example, face a lengthy barrier in obtaining a full licence here, a situation that could be resolved with a simple bilateral agreement by exchanging their American driving licences for an Irish one. This is a straightforward solution and could facilitate the return of skilled individuals. We already have similar agreements with countries like Canada, France and Germany. I heard the Taoiseach earlier talk about the diaspora and the undocumented. This is his chance to do something. We are crying out for construction workers, healthcare workers, and we need to make it easier for returning immigrants. The recent allocation of funding for road improvements is a drop in the ocean compared to what's truly needed. It's clear that these funds will not cover the urgent repairs essential for the safety of drivers. Government TDs should be ashamed of themselves. Yet the people of Meath pay almost 60 million per year in motor tax. We need immediate action. The Government needs to acknowledge its responsibility. You must expedite the recruitment of permanent driving test instructors, end the over-reliance on temporary staff and conduct a thorough review of the RSA's capacity to manage this crisis. We need more driving test centres and a strategic plan to ensure we achieve that statutory maximum waiting time of 10 weeks and less. I I feel sorry for the many workers who contact me and miss out on job opportunities, all because of this backlog. They deserve a system that works for them. The RSA were quick, under the watchful eye of this government, to up their prices, but slow to improve their services.
Thank you, Deputy Cathy Bennett.
I can Carla Atara. In April last year, the Sinn Féin Minister of State at the Department of Transport, now the Minister for Public Expenditure, described the prior hiring of 30 testers as not enough. He assured us that we would see significant progress in October and the end of the year, and that it would be early next year when we would get back to a 10-week waiting time. Well, it is now early in the next year, and the backlog has increased to nearly 10,000 in the past 3 months. Having increased by over 4,000 since mid-January alone, there is no sign of abatement. Yet another instance of a Fianna Fáil minister over-compromising and over-promising in advance of an election, only to undeliver in the clear light of day. The impact of this failure is very real. More than 1,200 drivers in Cavan and Monaghan stuck paying expensive insurance policies. People have no choice but to use their cars to get to work or to college and to go about their daily lives. I would like to thank my party colleague and Sinn Féin spokesperson on transport, Deputy Pa Daly, for bringing forward this motion and outlining in the first instance the need for you as Minister to take responsibility and to take immediate action to recruit new permanent driving testers rather than continuing to rely upon temporary hires. Because in principle it is straightforward, Minister. When demand for public services increases, it must be matched by resources necessary to meet that demand. It is clear that as of today, the RSA do not have enough capacity to address the backlogs, and that what is needed in drafting and urgent implementation of a plan to achieve the statutory minimum waiting times of 10 weeks. Sinn Féin have outlined what is required. It is now for the Minister to illustrate if he is capable of delivering.
Thank you, Deputy. Now we move to our Minister, Dara O'Brien. Minister.
Sinn Féin Creekna inis. Dús ceann córa bhualam a week ago as cheachta daily agus cólaí as Sinn Féin as an rúnatáig flé a gin anocht. I do welcome the opportunity to address the House and to update you on the National Driver Testing Service. And I do acknowledge the concerns that have been raised by deputies. I also note the lack of some constructive points about what we would do, but to leave that aside, it is an issue. Waiting times are too long, unquestionably, and I agree that it's a vital public service and that the public need an efficient and they need a dependable driver testing service, and when undertaking their journey to pass their driving test and to learn how to drive, and that it is not at this stage at a service level that I believe is acceptable. And in the course of my contribution this evening, I'll tell you what we're doing about that. And for that reason, I can confirm that Government won't be opposing this motion this evening. And everyone in the House has heard from constituents, as I have, about the issues and the challenges that extended driver testing wait times have on individuals and on families. And there's no disagreement that the current waiting times are far in excess of what is acceptable. And I would like to assure the deputies across the House that measures have been taken to address the issue, and I expect that we will begin to see progress in the coming months, and I'm prioritising this issue in my engagements with the RSA board, a new chair we appointed this morning as well, and their senior management team, and deputies may be aware opposite of the transformation programme that we're engaging on within the Road Safety Authority as well. Just before I continue, I do think it's important to note that under the Road Safety Act, the Road Safety Authority has statutory responsibility for the National Driver Testing Service. So the opposition motion, or the Sinn Féin motion, has called on me to take immediate action to expedite the ongoing recruitment process. But the legislation passed by the Oireachtas, the operation of that service is in the statutory remit of the RSA. And neither I nor my officials are directly involved in the operation of the service. But steps have, however, been taken to support the RSA so that they can carry out the job that they're mandated to do. And they need to do that, and that's about increasing service capacity and improving service delivery. So as the deputies are aware, the driving testing service wait time is currently far above the service level agreement target of 10 weeks. And a number of deputies here have alluded to that already. As a point of clarity, I must point out that the opposition motion is incorrect, that this target is defined in statute. It is not. Nevertheless, it's an important target and one that the RSA should meet and need to deliver on. So compared to this 10-week wait at the end of January, and for the information of the House, the wait time was 22 weeks. And in some of the busiest test centres, the current wait time is over 30 weeks. And that's far too long. It's unacceptable that amount of time people have to wait for a test, and it has been trending in the wrong direction. And I do understand the concerns of deputies who have spoken so far, and most importantly, the frustration of individuals who are directly impacted by these delays. Fundamentally, these rising waiting times have been driven by rapidly increasing demand and population growth. And this demand can be seen by the number of learner permits in circulation and by the record number of advanced driving instructors working in the sector to deliver lessons to learner drivers. So 2024 was the busiest year in the history of the service, and I think it's important we put this debate in context. So the RSA receiving just under 275,000 new driving test applications, which was 10% above their own projections for last year. The applications also add to the backlog, which, as deputies will know, arose following the pandemic and has persisted as a result of incoming demand outstripping the RSA's own capacity. Waiting times increased last year from April onwards as the number of driver testers in employment declined due to a mix of retirement, fixed-term contracts reaching their conclusion, and testers taking up alternative offers of employment. To try to meet the demand, there was extensive working of overtime by driver testers to mitigate impact on customers, and incentive programme for testers to deliver additional tests, the introduction of short notice cancel slot systems, and the continuation of a priority list for healthcare workers, which I believe is critically important. So in total, over 250,000 tests were delivered last year. So no deputy opposite has actually mentioned that. 250,000 tests carried out last year. And I have sought to support the RSA in meeting this demand and addressing the issue of lengthy driving test waiting times by sanctioning additional driver tester positions to increase capacity in the system. Deputies have alluded to this already, that in March 23 there were fixed-term contracts for 75 additional drivers for contracts of up to 2 years. The opposition motion questioned this, as is your right to recruit driver testers on a temporary basis, but I think that was the right decision at the time, particularly post-pandemic, to see how that increased amount and that backlog would actually be dealt with. So it's also important to highlight that average driver testing times over that period significantly improved, and from a peak of over 30 weeks in August 2023, that reduced to about 14.9 weeks in 2024. However, the total number of testers in employment at any point never exceeded 176, and as I've already outlined, it actually declined last year in 2024. Following on from this long-term assessment of capacity requirements, the RSA prepared a business case for a permanent sanction of additional driver testers. So on receipt of the business case, the department moved very swiftly to sanction 70 additional driver testing posts on a permanent basis, and that was done in September of last year. So the total permanent sanction driver test headcount is actually 200 today, representing a doubling of the permanent headcount in just over 2 years. So that's 100 extra since June 2022. So I understand this recruitment campaign to hire additional driver testers is at an advanced stage. Offers are currently being made to new recruits and being prioritised for areas experiencing the longest waiting times. So these resources will go to the areas in particular where the longest waiting times are being experienced. A recruitment campaign of this size does take time. I think deputies may appreciate that or may not, but this sanction was in September 2024. These posts will be filled and are being filled, and that will help us move progressively to work towards the 10-week service level agreement target as new testers are trained and brought on board. Furthermore, the RSA believes that the permanent positions now available will attract and retain a higher number of driver testers, so the progress in tackling the waiting times can be better sustained into the future. In relation to the Deputy's concerns on the number of driver testing centres around the country, and I note the point by the Deputy from Louth, specifically about Drogheda. I also note the fact that she might inform her Deputy from Cavan Monaghan that she's acknowledged the 5,000 new homes being built in Drogheda as well. And Drogheda is indeed the fastest growing town in the country, unquestionably. And the RSA will regularly collaborate with the OPW. I'm interested in the points that you raised about the reasons that certain driver testing centres, potential ones, were refused, and I will look into that. I intend to engage with the RSA. They manage their capital programme. They manage their staff. I don't, but I want to see this situation improve. I think we can with the additional posts that are in place, focusing them on the areas with the greatest of need. I've dealt with young people and not so young people as well, who are waiting for new jobs, new positions, who are dependent on the ability to get a timely driver test. I welcome the fact that still the healthcare worker prioritisation will remain in place, and these are matters that I will be addressing directly with the RSA. I'm also aware, in particular, in the case of Drogheda, and I'd mention that lengthy engagements and extensive searches, as you've outlined, have taken place. There should be a driver testing centre in Drogheda. I know my colleague, Minister Thomas Byrne, has met the RSA or will be meeting them shortly. I'm sure deputies opposite are doing likewise to discuss the concerns, so I will continue to do that. In conclusion, the motion today is in line with the principles and policies of government in terms of defining expectations for service levels. Like our state agencies across the board and those within my remit need to be focused on the customer and delivering the service that is there. The backlog was there because of circumstances, particularly through COVID. It was difficult to carry out tests. People will remember social distancing. A backlog built up. That's a fact. That's a reality. That had to be dealt with. Waiting times didn't reduce far enough. So the 70 additional posts focused in the right areas will help. I will be advancing with the RSA in relation to additional driving testing centres also. So I will keep the deputies and indeed the committee, the Oireachtas committee, informed of progress. I look forward to contributions from members opposite from all parties and independents and indeed in government on this debate, and I will listen to it intently.
Gurmagat Arash Gaji Sinn Féin agus Chokta Magedigan Level.
Gurmagat Kahirlach, and I'd like to thank our colleague Pa Daly for bringing this forward. Minister, while I welcome that you won't oppose this motion, and yes, many tests have been completed, but the waiting list is growing and growing, and there's no denying that. So are you saying that you cannot step in, that this is all down to the RSA? And we all know a driving licence is not a luxury, it's essential. And not being able to drive could mean missing out on work opportunities, education, family occasions and more. This is especially true outside of large cities. Public transport in rural Ireland leaves a lot to be desired, and many people simply cannot afford to rely on it for work, college, shopping, doctor's appointments or other activities. Before anyone can sit their driving test, they must have held their learner permit for a minimum of 6 months, and they must have successfully completed at least 12 essential driver training lessons. To then have to wait an average of 5 months is unacceptable, and in some cases these tests have been deferred, and this is not helping those who are dependent on their licence for a new job. Someone who requires a driving licence for work cannot afford to wait 11 months to get one, and businesses trying to hire drivers cannot afford it either, and the possible economic knock-on effects on the economy cannot be dismissed. In addition, people who have completed their 12 lessons have just acquired a brand new skill which will need to practice, and if they're forced to waste many months, they may start to lose those skills, resulting in them being more likely to fail the test. This is a waste of their time and money, and the time of the money of the state. In addition to the needs for extra testers, we need extra test centres with full-time staff. In my own town of Shannon in County Clare, it has a population of over 10,000, yet we have no test centre, and people are reliant on testers coming in from elsewhere, and they're having to meet learner drivers in hotel car parks. This is just a shambles, and I've been told that there were no tests done in January in Shannon at all. And this is not a new problem, so you must have been aware of this now for years. So I'm glad to see that you will be taking steps, and I hope this will be as a matter of urgency. Gormagat.
Snoddy Leatherholt.
And this is a very important matter, given kind of that a lot of people's work depends on driving nowadays. And kind of while the Minister mentioned kind of progress being made, progress has been so slow, and I can quote, probably like every other TD here, cases where people haven't got access to a test, where they seem to have ended up in whatever hole that kind of the RSA has created to swallow up applications, kind of, so you end up with people who are paying extra money for lessons and that to keep their hand in to make sure that they have the money also for the tests to ensure that their car kind of isn't just sitting there, but they can't drive that car kind of because they don't have a licence. They can't go to the test centre because they don't have a licence, and kind of their car is often sitting there with insurance and tax paid on it, and they wait and they wait. Kind of, I've had quite a number of cases in recent months, so it seems to be getting worse, of people who have jobs and the like, who are awaiting work, awaiting clearance, but can't get the test, and quite a substantial amount of money in terms of insurance, and they can't avail of it or work. And there's also the issue of those who have licences from abroad, truck drivers kind of and the like, who come back to Ireland and their licences aren't recognised, and they end up kind of losing the work that they've come home to because they don't have the licence, because there's no recognition. In fact, if in one case he came back from Australia and the licence wasn't recognised, even though he'd gone to Australia with an Irish licence, changed it over there, and then kind of lost out. If he went north, he would be recognised straight away. And then there's the issue of the theory tests and the fact that that's a money scam, money-making scam, because you're robbing, especially young people who are trying to pass the first hurdle, and yet you're asking them for quite a lot of money and then changing the rules time in, time out. And the fact that there isn't that many test centres, theory test centres, it's only four in Dublin. Use the library services, it'd be a lot easier. It is digital, and you'd be putting money back into the local authorities if you use the library service, reduce the amount that's been charged on young people, and make sure that this happens every single year that I've been in the Dáil. Minister stood over there and says how great they're doing and how these tests will be reduced, the waiting list will be reduced. It hasn't happened.
Dr. Cullinan.
Minister, 72,000 learner drivers languishing on waiting lists. 10,000 of those have come onto the waiting lists in the last 3 months alone. I don't think you can blame anybody but the government for that one. The target of a maximum 10-week wait time, and the Minister says it's not a statutory target. Maybe it should be, and that's the possibility of the opposition bringing forward a bill, Minister, to rectify that. I hope the Minister will support it. And you talked about solutions, so this isn't rocket science, and this is fairly easily to identify what the problem is, and it's very easy to identify what the solution is, Minister. We don't have enough driving instructors. We have a lot of temporary instructors, but there's many areas where we know there are gaps where we don't have enough driving instructors. So what's the solution? We hire more driving instructors. We don't have enough test centres. Some of them, again, are temporary. In some areas, we don't have any test centres. So we've identified the obvious solution to get the RSA and the OPW to identify the gaps and to make sure that every city and county has enough test centre. So it's not rocket science. The fact that that's beyond the comprehension or the ability of the government to resolve is the problem. Well, it is, because there are many people who don't have the tests within the target timeframes that they should. You'll get a chance maybe to respond again later, Minister. And I want to just read out one example of a young man that contacted me from Waterford. He's not interested in glib responses from you. He's interested in you coming up with solutions and actually dealing with the problem. He needs his licence for work. He finished his lessons and was signed off at the start of September. He was originally told that he would be invited for a test by the 10th of January. He was then told it would be the 17th of March at the earliest, and possibly further than that, and then he'd have to wait another 3 or 4 weeks after that to get the test. That's the reality, Minister, unfortunately. And unless we have more driving instructors, unless we have more permanent test centres, then many more people are going to have to wait longer for the test, and it's unfair on them, and it's something that can be fixed.
Dr. Kenny.
Minister, since I was in the transport portfolio, I'd said, what, a year and a half ago now, the predecessor told me that this has all been solved and been sorted out and going in the right direction. I remember Jack Chambers standing here and actually telling us that they were recruiting more driving test instructors, that they were going to open more testing centres. All of this was in hand, everything was sorted out. But the truth is, since then, it has gone in the opposite direction. And the figures bear this out. There's over 72,000 people now on the waiting list. It's the longest it's ever been. Some of them are up to 8 months on the waiting list. And, you know, it simply isn't good enough. If you were to apply for a driving test today in Sligo, you would wait 7 months to get that driving test. If you were to apply for one in Leitrim, you wait up to 6 months to get that driving test. And, you know, it's outrageous because people who live in rural communities and in rural areas simply can't manage without their car. That's what they need to get to work. That's what young people, particularly starting out, that's the only method they have of travelling, because we don't have the public transport infrastructure that are in urban areas. So I think, Minister, there needs to be a recognition that government has dropped the ball in respect of this. And, you know, to pass the buck on to the RSA and say they haven't done this or haven't done that, or everything has been done that can be done, simply doesn't stand up. And we need to recognise that we have an awful lot of work to do, because people have to get to appointments, people need their car to get to work, to get to hospital appointments, to get their children to school. All of these things, as you cut transport in every other way. I mean, we fight every year in here when it comes to September to get people on school buses, for school bus transport. Many people who live in rural areas can't get the school bus. They need their car to bring their children to school, and particularly younger couples, and maybe one of them has to get a driving licence. I had a case recently of a doctor who contacted our office who returned from America. He couldn't transfer his US licence and ended up for several months having to get a taxi when he was on late nights to call into the hospital in and out to work. And if he was to drive a car, he had to get somebody who was a qualified driver to be along with him. I mean, this is another preposterous situation where people who return here from the US can't get their driving licences transferred over. And it needs to be resolved. And I know, Minister, you agree with me that it needs to be resolved, but why isn't it resolved? And these are the issues that we need to deal with. And there needs to be a sense of urgency around them, rather than continually passing the buck. So, you know, what we're asking for here this evening is an implementation of a plan, a strategic plan, to achieve this magic 10-week waiting list. And if we can do that, that's what needs to happen. I recognise that your government is not going to oppose the motion. Well, not opposing it isn't enough. You need to act on it, and you need to ensure that we deliver the 10-week waiting times that is the least people should expect.
Inish Kaji Party and Loch Debra, Agus Kuig Bomajid Jeg, Tosnu Le Chakta Ahern.
Thanks, Cahirlock, and my thanks to Deputy Daly and Sinn Féin for bringing forward this motion tonight. The Labour Party will be supporting it, and at the outset I want to congratulate the new chair of the RSA, Anne Graham. I want to wish her well in her role, and I hope she's listening. I'm of the belief that we should be doing everything we can to encourage people to use greener, more sustainable modes of transport. This means making sure that it's possible for everyone, that the option to travel by bus or by rail or to cycle is there for them wherever they might be going. The unfortunate reality, though, is that we're not there yet. There's a whole host of reasons for this, why people remain reliant on their cars, be it accessibility, connectivity, efficiency. In some parts of the country, public and active travel infrastructure is virtually non-existent. Yes, there have been improvements in recent years, and we welcome these, but those improvements have come at a fairly slow pace and still haven't got to us to a place where public transport is a viable option for most people. That does need to change, and government need to invest significantly and continue to do so that we have infrastructure, and that everyone across the country has the option of using public transport or safe active travel. We recognise that for now, though, private car use remains the preferred and in some cases the only option for very many people. And with that, we seriously need to get a handle on the backlog of driving test applications and the wait times that we're seeing. This is ultimately an issue of road safety. We saw 174 people die on our roads last year. There's been a worrying increase in road casualties over the past number of years in this country. The numbers have been trending in the wrong direction, and I was glad that we had the opportunity just a couple of weeks ago to discuss road safety in this House. We need to increase road maintenance across the country. We need more enforcement of the rules of the road. We need to reduce speed limits, and ongoing driver education must also play a part in this discussion. What's particularly stark is the number of young people who are dying or getting seriously injured in road traffic accidents. People under 25 or younger represented 35% of the fatalities on our roads last year, the highest proportion among any age group, and that's up from about 25% in 2023 and 16% the previous year. So we know that between 2019 and 2023, there were 131 road traffic accidents involving learner drivers, in which someone was killed or seriously injured. In 107 of those cases, the learner driver was unaccompanied. I am by no means trying to assign any blame here. Obviously, each case will have been different, but I raise this issue because the longer people are waiting to do their driving test, the more they are tempted to drive illegally without a full licence, to try their luck, and the more chance there is that they will pick up bad habits that are difficult to unlearn. We simply can't have people driving unaccompanied on our roads if they haven't passed their test, and potentially in some cases people haven't even done the mandatory 12 lessons. It poses a serious risk not just to those drivers themselves, but the road users around them as well. And this isn't just about having a driver's licence for the sake of it. Young people are being pushed further and further away from college campuses because of the lack of affordable housing. And where there's no public transport option available to them, they need to be able to drive to college, or else they face torturous commutes. I do think the long-term solution, again, has to be better public transport. But in the meantime, we have to address the fact that students are dropping out of college because they simply can't get there, and many of them are languishing on a driving test waiting list. We're also seeing people miss out on job opportunities because having a driver's licence is a requirement, but again, they can't get a test in time. We're seeing much needed apprentices, for example, left high and dry because they can't get their driving licence, and then they're forced to either pause or drop out of an apprenticeship altogether. There's lots of people in my constituency in Dublin South West who work along the M50 in the industrial estates off it, and there's no or very little direct public transport access to those industrial estates, so they have to rely on private cars to get there. Workers who are waiting on a driving test are being let down, they're missing opportunities. That's before considering the additional financial burden that's being placed on people waiting for their test by way of the increased insurance premiums for learner drivers. So, and probably most concerning to my mind, and again it's an issue raised in the motion, it's the knock-on effect the backlog has and the wait times have on vital services like paramedics, the haulage sector, and indeed public transport provision. There's a vicious cycle emerging that's holding us back from encouraging people to use public transport, and people are forced to rely on private cars because of the inadequate or unreliable bus services. And we can't even improve those bus services at times because providers like Dublin Bus or Go Ahead can't get the drivers who are potentially waiting on driving licences. So I welcome the Minister's comments tonight in not opposing this motion, but it's quite clear that there's been a serious mismanagement by the RSA and the Government with respect to virtually all aspects of our roads, be it road safety or indeed driving licence, driving test waiting times. As an aside to the matter this motion deals with, but it's not unrelated, the NCT wait times are also outrageous and are undoubtedly affected by the delays elsewhere in the system. These need urgent attention as well. But ultimately, it appears that the RSA is unfortunately incapable of fulfilling its aim of a 10-week maximum waiting period for a test. The national average is more than double that, and looking at the data, there isn't a single test centre in the country that's meeting the 10-week aim. In my own constituency, the Tala Test Centre is seeing wait times of 27 weeks for a test. More than 8,300 people are waiting for a test in Tala. It's nowhere near good enough. The Government has to take its fair share of responsibility. In April 2023, then Minister of State at the Department of Transport, Jack Chambers, said that by the end of Q1 of 2024, the wait times for applicants would be down to 10 weeks. Then the following October, he said it would be mid-2024 before it was achieved. I believe that was during a motion actually on this topic brought forward by the Rural Independent Group, some of whom are now members of this Government. So perhaps they will have a word with the Minister or themselves, because here we are almost 2 years after the initial promise was made and the massive backlog and wait times persist. There simply hasn't been the urgency or attention that is required given by Government, and the issue is compounding problems elsewhere in the transport system. As I've said in this House before, it is welcome that there will be a separation of functions in the RSA arising out of the recent review of that organisation. We need to see an implementation plan that sets out the framework of the new organisation, if there is to be one, particularly with regards to its testing functions and the resources being put behind it in the context of this motion. As the motion states, we need to end the practice of hiring temporary driving test instructors, and more broadly, we need to ensure that the new entity is sufficiently resourced both to address the current issues and to ensure that they don't arise again. That does include opening new testing facilities, and the OPW and the RSA are hopefully now working to identify potential sites. We did have temporary test centres during COVID, and it's obvious now that they were closed prematurely. I would suggest the government should explore the possibility of these sites reopening in the interim while new locations are identified, so that the backlog doesn't worsen while new permanent sites are being identified. I'll conclude by once again reiterating my support for the motion. It's a constructive motion, and I'm glad to see the government maybe taking it on board. We desperately need to increase the number of driving test instructors. We need to properly resource the RSA or whatever entity follows it. We need new testing sites to relieve the pressure on existing sites. I will add, though, that all of this needs to be done in conjunction with increased, sustained investment into public and active transport, so that we aren't so reliant on private cars and that sustainable travel is available and accessible to everyone. Thank you.
Dr. Nash.
Thanks very much, Chair. Minister, you will be aware that Drogheda is Ireland's largest town that is yet, and I use that term deliberately, yet to become a city. And what we don't have is a driving test centre. We had a temporary driving test centre for a couple of years located in a local football club, and the RSA decided that they would not renew that contract, this time 2 years ago, leaving Drogheda without any form of driving test centre. And what did they do? They blamed the local residents. You could not make it up. When an arrangement was to be made with all of the stakeholders to seek to extend that temporary accommodation to allow for the location and identification of a site for a permanent test centre in the area. The RSA are effectively trolling my hometown. If you're a young provisional driving licence holder living in the Drogheda area, you will be waiting for 8 months for a test in Navan and 5 in Dundalk. And the RSA since then have done absolutely nothing to identify a site for a permanent driving test centre in Ireland's largest town, in Drogheda. And they are not being held to account. They are an organisation who feel they are accountable to nobody. And you have a job, Minister, to make sure that that changes and to ensure that the RSA do what they promised me and other deputies and the people of Drogheda a long time ago, that they would develop a permanent driving test centre for Ireland's largest town.
Dr. Kenny.
Good Chair. I'm going to share my time with Deputy Alan Kelly.
In fairness, there seems to be a fair amount of time if you want to leave it till the end.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Chair. I welcome the motion from Sinn Féin. Minister, if I contact the RSA, if I get a query, more than likely from a parent or from maybe someone my own age, and I'm asked about a delay that they have to get an appointment for a test, what I'm told by the RSA is to contact different test centres around the country. So asking a person from Cork to come to Dublin or even further afield to do their test is absolutely madness. There's no quality there when it comes to actually trying to get those tests and those appointments fulfilled as quickly as possible. There's one example in particular, Evan, the guy's name is, around my own age, trying to get access to a driving test, applied on the 6th of December and has been given a date of the 16th of June now to get a driver test. That's unbelievable. And Minister, you will be well aware of this, and now in your new position, you would be well aware of the fact that the people of Cork North Central and a lot of the area being in a rural part of the constituency, people in the likes of Watergrass Hill or Carricknavar or Whitechurch or Mournabbey or Burnford or Rahan, wherever you may be, access to public transport isn't really forthcoming. So people are relying on the car to get to and from work, to go to college, to go to school. So one parent in particular I met, gets up early in the morning, travels to MTU every morning, drops the child off there and has to go to her own job and then go and collect the child again to bring the child back home. That is extraordinary. The child is waiting on a driver test. It's absolutely outrageous, the waiting times that we have in this country, up to 6 or 7 months. And I do welcome the motion from Sinn Féin. I think it's a very, very important one.
I want to thank Sinn Féin for bringing forward this motion tonight. Minister, I also want to wish you well in your new role. There's been a lot of talk tonight about the totally unacceptable statistic of 174 of our citizens dying on the road, and indeed a lot of talk about young drivers and allowing young drivers to train and to learn the rules of the road. I just want to bring to your attention, Minister, in the time available to me, an issue that's going on in my own hometown of Athy this week. It's a road safety week being run by Athy College, the principal there, Richard Daly, and also by the virtual driving hub in the name of Barry Keatley. And what they're doing, Minister, is they're bringing in virtual driving hubs into the school to allow students to experience driving conditions in various conditions on the road at a very young age. So everyone from first years right up to 6 years are getting the chance to actually drive a vehicle, although it be virtual. And it's the education that they're receiving from this that I want to bring to your attention tonight, Minister, because I believe this is where we need to start off. We need to spread what's happening in Athy College this week right around the curriculum, right around all our secondary schools throughout the country, because we need to add to the curriculum road safety. And they're not actually just looking at driving, they're looking at pedestrian safety, they're looking at cycling safety. So I would ask you, Minister, as part of this motion, that we do look at education, and it is very important that we do so at our secondary school level. And something like the virtual driving that's been going on this week in the Athy College is something that would benefit so many people, and most importantly benefit those that need it most, the students, as they set out in their driving experiences, because the feedback from students this week that I've experienced in listening to the principal is that they are actually experiencing something that they never thought they would, and also the dangers that they're getting from virtual driving, I think will stand them as they move forward in their driving career. So something you might look at, Minister.
Thank you, Minister, and best wishes in your role. I want to specifically ask you to do one thing. Will you ask the RSA, do they assess the pass-fail rates in test centres and of testers? I talk about an issue that's raised in my office all the time, again last week, the week before, 30 or 40 times, where one tester is and has a massive fail rate. Now, how is that possible? I've tried to raise it, it hasn't worked. I've had numerous issues whereby people have gone and sat the test 3 times, they went up the road to Borough and passed. I've had a situation where an 18-year-old girl who paid 85 euros ended up crying because she couldn't even get the test taken because this tester, who often doesn't allow people to even do the test based on the vehicle, because the brake light was a slight little bit faded because of wattage when the actual indicator was on. Now, this person worked 9.5 hours to earn the money to be able to sit €85 test and didn't get to sit it. Continuously in my office, and the people of Nina and surrounds are saying there's an issue. Why does statistically one tester actually fail way more than anyone else? So please, Minister, I would ask, will you ask the RSA to provide pass-fail rates by test centre and pass-fail rates anonymised by tester so they can go and see where there's anomalies and look into them? Because obviously there's an issue here, because when this person was off, amazingly, the pass-fail rates came up to national average. Thank you.
Chuck the Whitmore or this.
Thank you very much for your and I'll be sharing time with my 2 colleagues this evening. I want to thank Deputy Daly and Sinn Féin for bringing forward this motion, and it is a very important motion because it impacts on so many lives, particularly young people's lives. I think what we see oftentimes is we make things particularly difficult for young people in this country, and I think this is one instance of this. I do acknowledge the fact that both ministers are new in the role, and indeed that the government isn't going to oppose this motion. But what we do need to see now is action, because whilst you're new in the role, your party has held this position for a number of years, and in March 2024 there was a promise made by the Department of Transport that the waiting times will be down to the 10-week maximum allowable under the service level agreement with the RSA. This was repeated in April by Minister Jack Chambers. Clearly that didn't happen, and in September we had a promise by government that the sanctioning of an additional 70 permanent posts would solve the problem, and that the 10-week limit would be in as soon as possible. Now, look, I welcome the fact that there were 70 posts and that they were permanent. I think that was really important. But actually, I do think at this stage the Minister needs to have the RSA in to ask them what has happened to those 70 posts. So they were sanctioned in start of September. The recruitment process, my understanding, closed in October. And yet they're still not in place. I was told today by the RSA that the first tranche of those people recruited will begin training in March. So we're still looking at many, many months before they're actually in place and where they can start working to bring that waiting time down. I was also told that they would be prioritising Dublin and Cork in the first tranche. Which to me, I understand, where it needs to be prioritised are the places who need the testers and have the largest waiting lists. That is not just Dublin and Cork, and I'll come back to that later in my contribution. But I do think it's really important, Minister, at this stage that you bring the RSA in and get them to answer questions as to how long, how can it take so long for them to undertake a recruitment process and get people trained into these roles, because this waiting list, it's not acceptable, and there's been no improvement. Indeed, since the 70 positions were sanctioned last September, at that stage there was 155 testers across centres across the country. Currently there's 151. So actually the numbers have gone backwards, and you can see that as well in the waiting lists, which have gone up by 10,000 people in those same months. And indeed the waiting time has gone from an average of 18 weeks across the country to 22 weeks now. So things are going backwards, and the 70 positions that were sanctioned have not made any difference as of yet. And I do want to specifically talk about my county of Wicklow, because whilst the country average is 22 weeks, in Wicklow it's 26, which is just incredibly high. It's an awful long time to expect people to wait for their driving test. I went digging for information on this, and actually the CSO website is a font of information when it comes to the waiting list. There's 999 people waiting in Wicklow for their list. There's one tester in the county, according to the website. There's a number, maybe 3 or 4 counties that have one tester, and Wicklow is one of them. Now, compare that with 5 testers in Wexford, and I think we can see why there's a 26-week waiting list. So I think it's clear that there's major problems, particularly in some centres, and I would ask, Minister, when the RSA are putting the first tranche of recruited driver testers in, that they actually focus on those counties, such as Wicklow, that only have one tester, because clearly if that person gets sick or takes leave, it shuts the whole system down. And I also think for that one tester, or even if there's 2 or 3 testers in a centre, the stress they must be under, knowing that every single person who's coming in to the test centre, that they're responsible for doing the tests, it must be enormous for them. And I don't think it's healthy or good for those workers to be put into that position. So I would ask that you look at that. But Minister, I think it's really important at this stage that there is sanctions and accountability for the RSA, because for years now there's been problems, there's been solutions provided, and they haven't actually worked. And I think it is now that the RSA need to actually face some level of accountability. Now, whilst it's not a statutory 10-week limit, it is a service level agreement. So, Minister, I would be interested to know contractually, if they do not meet that service level of agreement with the department, what is the penalty for them? Is there any penalty? And I would ask, actually, I would ask that you answer that in your response, if you can. I also think at this stage with the NCT, and I know there's problems with the NCT waiting lists as well, but actually if they don't meet their time frame, they provide their NCT tests for free. And I think actually if there was a financial penalty such as that for the RSA, I think actually we'd see them really focus and make sure that they had enough staff to conduct these centres. So that's another thing I would ask, that you look at actually, if they go past their 10 or 12 weeks, at that stage, if they do not provide an applicant with their driving test, that they should provide that free past that point. And I think that would make the RSA sit up and actually put in a system that is workable and that meets the needs of communities across the country. Thank you very much.
Dr. Farley.
Thanks, Ciara, and thank you, Minister, and thanks, colleagues in Sinn Féin, for tabling this motion this evening. I'll keep my contribution quite short, if that's okay, but I think we're having this debate in the context of a conversation about climate emissions and the idea that we're amidst a necessary modal shift where our EU greenhouse emissions are 60% of those are passenger cars. And so when I hear interesting figures like 250,000 tests done last year, well, that's welcome. But certainly from a Kildare North perspective, that just leads me to believe more traffic congestion, more traffic congestion. So we need to look at this in the round. I think that's important. And in Ireland, that culture of car dependency is rooted in the idea that our public transport network fails to meet our needs. So research is ample in the reasons why we rely on cars. It's the independency, it's the autonomy, it's the flexibility that's associated with having to be able to move as and when we need fit, whether it's for work, for college, for education, and notwithstanding the idea that there will always be a cohort of our population that requires to drive to get to work and to these places, we shouldn't ignore the fact that what we need to do and what this government needs to really accelerate is the idea of a public transport network that is sufficient and fit for purpose for the Irish state. I'm drawn particularly to the idea of successive governments making a mess of the Metro link. Our DART Plus schemes are leaving really low-hanging fruit behind us. We have buses that are running at capacity continuously. We have bus lines now being cancelled and because they're not financially viable. So I think in tandem with a very meritable idea of lowering the waiting lists for driver tests, we should also see maximum investment and attention given to boosting our public transport system. I think when we do those things in tandem, that's where we'll see real success. In Kildare specifically, Minister, we have one test centre, and I can pretty much guarantee we've one of the youngest growing and fastest growing populations in the country. If we double our staff lines in Kildare, we will still see a significant increase in those 6 months' wait. I'd really encourage those who are making decisions in the RSA to highlight Kildare. We have one of the fastest growing populations, and certainly our needs will continue to grow with regards to waiting times. And my colleague Deputy Whitmore has put something very interesting forward in terms of proposition. I would also look at, if you have been those 10 weeks waiting on your test, that you receive a €100 leap card, a while you wait leap card, that will cover the costs of public transport in Ireland while you wait on that test. Again, another incentive for people while they're waiting for 6 months in Kildare, for example, that you have your public transport costs covered until you do get that test. Thank you, Ciara.
Garv Margaret, Cahirlock, Bawahlan, Wakas, Agawla, Sinn Féin for on motion show. Today I went on the RSA website and I put down the location for my nearest test centre, which would be Charlestown in Dublin. And if I was to apply for my driving test today, I would get the test the week beginning the 4th of August 2025. That's 23 weeks away by my counting. Now, of course, I didn't log up the system because I did my test in 1994. However, lots of contributors today have said, like, this is the worst it's ever been. I remember stories of when I grew up that we always slagged my mother because she was part of the 1960s group of people who didn't have to sit the test. They got it for free. Now, we did make a joking matter of the fact that she was actually not a great driver, but it isn't actually a laughing matter. We don't want to go back then and have people on the roads who are not taking tests and suitably driving. I know that, but at the time as a child it was incredibly funny. But that the same in the 70s happened, that there was a backlog cleared again, and here we are in 2025 and there's thousands and thousands of people waiting. I've been contacted, like everybody else who's spoken here today, by constituents in Dublin South Central. Well, I was contacted in Dublin South Central, you were contacted in your own constituencies, saying that the waiting times is unacceptable, people waiting to go to college, work, go about their daily business, and it's very, very expensive to get the driving lessons, to do the driving lessons, to be insured in a car if you have one, and also to get practice time and then to wait a long time. It's prohibitive for a lot of people, and if you'll allow me, that reliance on public transport is so important. and also there's a lot of waiting time for buses. There's a group in Inchicore Bluebell called Connecting Communities, and they're fighting to keep their bus service that connects them. They did a survey, and 63% of the people who responded to that survey do not own a car, so there's a huge reliance on public transport. They're fighting to keep the number 58 bus, which is going to replace 3 buses. It's only going to run once per hour, and it won't bring them to Thomas Street, which many of you may know is a famous, very famous street in Dublin 8, which provides for a lot of social markets, religious and medical appointments that people will be going to. I've been working with Joan Collins, who was a TD for the area, with that community to try and ensure that we have a meeting with the NTA. I haven't heard back from them yet, so I would look forward to hearing from them. So not everybody drives, but if they do drive, it's really important that they're not waiting for weeks and weeks on end. I'm very happy that the government are going to support this motion, and thankful to Sinn Féin for bringing it forward. Gurb Magat.
Grúpa technical neamhspleách agus teachta Conley le hol.
Míl Magat, Cúig nómad is
Cúig nómad an den.
Gurb Magat, and Mhuicas de Sinn Féin a sucht an rún seo a choras córna dála tá se Harbh tábhacht agus gur míle magah agus an deis tugad dúin páirte blachas sa díospóireacht. And Minister, I wished you the best on the last occasion. On this occasion, I note you're not amending the motion, which is good. And I suppose you might confirm whether you're going to implement the motion, because it's quite basic, really, isn't it? I mean, I looked at it, and very little is being asked, really. It's the most practical motion I've seen, to acknowledge the responsibility that when demand for public services increases, this is matched, instruct the Minister for Transport to take immediate action and so on, end the over-reliance on hiring temporary driving test instructors, and this temporary reliance is in possibly every single public service, conduct an urgent review and address the shortfall and implement. So perhaps it's welcome that you're not amending it. Perhaps you'll confirm whether you're implementing it and in what time space you're going to implement it. And all the figures have been given: 72,414 people waiting longer than the time necessary, waiting in limbo. Now, I want to re-echo the comments from Deputy Farrelly. I wish we were standing here talking about an integrated public transport system. We've utterly failed to do that in as many places as we should. So we push people into driving. Obviously, they need to do a driving test, and then this is what happens. And so there's very little I can say on the motion, so I'm going to use the opportunity for 2 reasons. The second one is in relation to a parochial or local issue. John Connolly, recently elected for Fianna Fáil, has raised this issue. I want to thank him for that, in relation to the moving of a driving centre from Westside in Galway City temporarily because of development commitments out to Knocknacarra. But there's no certainty that that's going to come back. And unusually, Minister, as I understand it, the city councillors and the county councillors are all of one view, that the driving centre, test centre, needs to be in where it was or around that area. Now, I know different sites were looked at and they weren't acceptable. A business park that didn't seem to be able to accommodate the centre because it was outside of what they were allowed to, and so on. But we need a guarantee from the authority that this, which is temporarily moved with a piece of string time, really, from sort of 12 to 18 months and longer before it would come back, and that just wouldn't be acceptable for Galway. And then just chun píosa eile rá, tá Galway tománaí agus an cadúnas tomána acu, ach chun maith le sin tá gá le bailse agus áitina ina bhfuil daoine ina chonaí go mbeadh siad sábháilte ar an móthar, agus is cuid den sábháilteacht é go mbeadh na tománaí in an tomáint agus cadúnas a bheith acu. Ach tá tíbheile den scéal, agus sin é tá freagracht ar na chóras áitiúil. Scéimena a chuirsúil, tá mbeadh smaoinemh agus é maithasamh anseo ar bharna í chun na Gaillimhe ar an Spideal, agus tá aspa áisina chuna cintú go bhfuil daoine anán gáil trasna an mhóthar, rud có bunúsach le ahra, dul trasna an mhóthar, níl sé sábhailte na bailse sin agus bailse beaga eile ar fud an conde. So, Adas atá feibanna á cruthú agan an seo ó híh lista fada ag an am céine tá feibanna eile maidiú le cuasaí sábháilteachta agus aspanna acmhainní ag gáil I dro na córas áitiúil chun na scéimeanna cuí agus na scéimeanna tábhachta a chur ar fáil. Just cúpla láithín bhí cruinniú aga mí ma ofag maidiú leis an ábhar seo agus an aspa airgid súrach I ná riire chun na baltí a dhéanamh níos sábháilte. So just happy mé an dheis chun sin a rás a dáil gurmacht.
Dr. Boyd Barrett.
Thanks to Sinn Féin and Deputy Daly for bringing this motion forward. Sure, happy to support. Yeah, I heard somebody say Tallaght was the worst in terms of the waiting list. It was reported in the middle of last year that Dún Laoghaire was the worst, so we're competing for that accolade. But certainly waiting times in Dún Laoghaire for tests and for resits are shockingly bad. I just thought I'd give the Minister a flavour, and they haven't improved, because I just took the trouble to just look through emails I'd got over the last couple of years, and what's evident from them is that nothing has improved for quite some time. One constituent wrote to me, and this is an interesting overlap of other failures by the government, and indeed by a minister who's moved from housing now to transport. In November 2023, a constituent wrote, "My housemates and I have recently received a no-fault eviction notice. I've had no luck finding alternative arrangements in Dublin, so come December the 31st, at the age of 29, I'll have to move in with my grandmother in Tipperary and commute to work. I'll need to commute to work daily, and for that I'll need, from Tipperary to Dún Laoghaire, my full driver's licence rather than a provisional. However, the wait times are apparent. I'm currently on the waiting list, and it is estimated that I only receive my invitation to book a slot for the test in September of next year. So from November to December. Quite incredible. But nothing has changed. Another constituent writes to me, in February of this year, I originally applied for my driving test in June 2024 with the expectation based on official guidance that I would be able to sit the test within 10 weeks. However, my waiting time has continuously been pushed back. First, I was informed I would receive an invitation to book my test in October, which then got delayed to January, and now I've been told I must wait till April the 28th just to select a date, which likely will be scheduled for late May or early June. If all goes well, it will have been an entire year since I registered, far from the promised 10-week turnaround outlined by the Minister for Transport." Or another constituent who wrote to me on the 22nd of February, who puts it very well and very succinctly, "I'm currently on a waiting list of 39 plus weeks for my first time driving test. That is 9 months, a full human gestation period." Pretty well put. And the answer, of course, is very basic: to recruit enough people to actually do the testing. And you have to wonder, given the fact that the government have been misleading the public about their recruitment strategy in the health service, telling the public, telling this House repeatedly, "Oh no, we're really trying to recruit people, we just find it difficult to recruit them." And then you discover when you talk to health workers, they're not trying to recruit them at all, because there's a thing called pay in numbers, which means they're telling different sections of the health service, you're actually not allowed to recruit people when you need them. So you have to wonder, is it just the same here, in something basic as testing people to drive so they can get their licence, when often their jobs are critical parts of their life, their existence depend on it. It's pretty pathetic, and the government should implement this motion.
Dr. Healy.
And thank Sinn Féin for bringing forward this motion. Very practical, I think, and reasonable motion. And I suppose before we start, we should all say that we would like to have an integrated public transport system right across the country. However, we don't. and I don't see any great move on the government's part or even previous governments to do that. So if you're a young person and from a rural area, it's particularly problematic to have a situation where you might be waiting up to 40 weeks for a driving test. And if you take, say, Clonmel as an example, if you're employed in one of the industries in Clonmel, Abbott Vascular or Boston Scientific or Bulmers or Medite, or you're working in the County Council or in Tipperary University Hospital, and you're from areas like Ardfinnan or Ballyporeen or Clogheen or Burncourt or Ballingarry or Killinall or Moyglass, you have to drive to work. There is no alternative. There's no public transport. And there's certainly no public transport if you're on shift in any of those industries. So it's very important for young people, particularly in rural areas, to be in a position to get a driving test and a driving licence in reasonable times. And if you're, again, attending the ETB further education courses in Clonmel, or you're attending the Technical University of the Shannon in Clonmel, again, and you're from any of the areas I outlined, you're going to have to drive. There is no public transport. So again, this is particularly problematic for young people. And when we look at it, we find that the waiting times are anything from 22 weeks to 40 weeks. And that obviously is unacceptable, and it's unsustainable as well. Now, there are two test centres in South Tipperary, Clonmel and Tipperary Town. Clonmel has double the 10-week maximum statutory limit, nearly 20 weeks. Tipperary Town is slightly better at 17 weeks. But again, this is particularly problematic. Again, for young people, it drives up the cost of insurance and it drives up the cost of getting to work and the cost of getting yourself mobile in a car can now cost you anything from €2,000 up to €3,000 to get to a situation where you have a full driver's licence. So that, Minister, is obviously unacceptable, and I think the motion that we have before us, as I said, is reasonable and practical. I mean, there's a backlog of over 72,000 currently, and that's a 60% increase on 2022. And in fact, in 2024, that backlog increased by over 20,000. And there is no test centre that I'm aware of that's meeting the 10-week statutory limit. And one wonders if the RSA, who are responsible for the service, have they the ability or the capacity to mend the system and to put in place what would be reasonable and to even meet the existing legal requirements. So, I think it's quite obvious that with increased demand for driving tests, that increased demand has to be met by increased resources, both by way of funding and by way of staffing. And we have a situation where currently the staffing is 205 permanent posts. In December last year, there was 151 active posts. 151. So we obviously need additional permanent driving testers. And I stress that word, we need additional permanent testers. And we do need additional centres. A number of centres, both permanent and temporary centres, have been closed over the years, and they need to be reopened. And in respect of South Tipperary, I believe that we need at least another test centre in Carrick-on-Suir in the east of the county. And I think it's necessary to ensure that the RSA, who are responsible for the service, that they put a plan in place to ensure that they meet the 10-week statutory limit, because this has repercussions for people right across the country, and as I say, particularly repercussions for people, and young people in particular, who live in rural areas and have no option but to drive to the local town or the local city for employment or for education. Thank you.
Inish on grúpa technical agus Teachta O'Donoghue. Carbon
2 minutes. Thanks, Chair. Minister, the taxpayers' money. So now what we have is we've up to 6 months in places of a delay on young people getting their driving test. We have people that are following the rules that have been legislated for. You go, you get your 12 lessons done, you do your theory test, you get your 12 lessons done, and then we have to wait 6 months to get on the road. That then to me becomes back a government's problem. So that means that the government should be responsible for the 6 months delay for the driving test. So that means there has to be an accountability. So even if you look at the fuel prices at the moment, and they're saying it's going to soar up to €2 shortly, you're taking €1 of that. But again, there's no accountability on the taxes that you take. The failure for the RSA to deliver driving tests on time, there's no accountability for that. But yet we have people all around Ireland trying to get to work, trying to get to college because there's no transport there, again, on the failure of somebody. But the same people that are failing all the time, there's no accountability because they're kept in their job. How can you create anything to go forward if you can't correct the problems of the past? Accountability. That's what it's come down to. They're not only letting us down, they're letting you down. So when is the fist going to come down and say, we want you to deliver, if you can't deliver, get out of the position you're in? I've said this more than once today, there is no accountability for anyone that can't deliver. But all that I can guarantee you is that you will take excess taxes on everyone, even though you can't deliver. So I'm asking you, stand up, Minister, make them accountable. If they can't deliver, move them. And you have to subsidise then the people that are waiting for tests.
Thank you. Like many of the stories that are being told today by deputies around the House, I too am having constituents coming to me continuously, Minister, telling me that they can't get driving tests. Mothers telling me that they're driving their sons or daughters to university, which not only inconveniences their lives, but affects them financially, affects them in the sense that how do they get to work, how do they plan an entire day. Additionally, Minister, we're talking about, and I think it has to be mentioned in this debate tonight, and nobody, I don't think, has mentioned it. We've had, in the last year, 6,016 people didn't show up for their driving test. There's something radically wrong with that as well, and that has to be penalised and that has to be addressed. Minister, in Spain it takes 12 weeks to get your driving test. In Wales it takes 13 weeks. In France it takes the average of 12 weeks. And here we're now being told of averages of up to 30 weeks across Dublin. I've told you about you're familiar with Cork the same as I am, Minister. We see that the public transport has failed. We see in my constituency of Cork North Central, about 60% of that is rural, with little to no bus services or other services available to the people in my constituency. And we know in the cities where buses are running, they're not running on time. We're lucky if they show up at all. Minister, can I put to you also, we're talking today about infrastructure and talking about roads and road safety. Many people have mentioned road safety in this House, but we're not developing the infrastructure around the road safety. Where, Minister, where is the Mallow Distributor Road? Where is the Northern Ring Road? Where is the Northern Distributor Road? And where is the Cork to Limerick motorway? We haven't delivered that. We're talking about driver safety. People have mentioned the amount of young people in accidents. But surely if we're not building the proper infrastructure for the population we have, you're using the excuse population over and over again in this House, but you're not addressing the population problems that need to be addressed. And you know that, Minister. Thank you.
Collins,
Thank you very much. Minister, in August 2024, a headline from one of the newspapers stated that the longest waiting list for a driving test in Ireland was 22 weeks. However, 6 months later, 22 weeks is now likely the shortest waiting list. During the 33rd Dáil, I spoke 11 times about the lengthy waiting times for driving tests. Now in the 34th Dáil, we are making no progress. The solution is clear. We need more testers in the centres, working extending hours to clear the backlog. I have several constituents facing significant delays. A young woman from West Cork applied on August the 22nd. Imagine, Minister, August the 22nd, 2024. She has been told she might receive an invitation to her test in April 2025. An astonishing 8-month wait just for an invitation, which may be further delayed. This is causing immense strain on her family. And this is unfair because I know the girl, and she's a hard-working, progressive young woman that wants to do college, wants to do a bit of work, and wants to get on with life. And this government have failed her, and failed her miserably. The high cost of insurance for those without a full licence is also an issue. The young man, a young man also from West Cork, is the sole carer for his mother. He applied in December and has been told he might get an invitation in April 2025, which is likely to be delayed as well. Another young man applied on September 6, 2024, and was supposed to receive an invitation in February 2025. It is now February 25th, and he has yet to receive it. His father is seriously ill with cancer, and he is the only driver in the family responsible for taking his father to hospital and doctor appointments. And adding further insult to injury, a Labour TD today has suggested that drivers should take a theory test every time they renew their licence. These refresher courses proposed to occur every 10 years would only add more pressure to an already strained system. It beggars belief that anyone would be so out of touch with their constituents to come up with that as a good idea. We need practical solutions, not additional burdens. The focus should be on increasing the number of testers and reducing waiting times to ensure that our constituents can obtain their driving licence in a timely manner. And if we want to talk about anything in relation to educating people, educate our young people. Make sure it's in the curriculum going forward that they can be educated. We have a Bantry Driving Academy, probably no better in this country. And imagine, the kids should be taken there. They're taken to France for skiing and Spain, across Finland, across the world for skiing, and rightly so. They're taken for swimming lessons, but nobody cares about teaching them the very basics of how to drive a car, how to pass the theory test. It should be added to curriculum inside their school, and they shouldn't be able to leave school until they have that passed, Minister. And if that's never going to be done, we're going nowhere in here. We're going backwards instead of ahead. And these young people deserve that right. We have little public transport, and we're fighting to keep what we have today. We might have won the battle with the bus from Goleen, I hear this evening, and I appreciate that if that is the case. But the bottom line is here. We need to look at the condition of our roads, Minister. These are where is the real reasons for the accidents. I was in Ballinscarty on Sunday. The road flooded. The rivers on the roadside flooded. The TII will give orders from the top, pencil pushers from Dublin, telling the people on the national roads, cut down the speed. Basically, pull up the car and go on cycle pace all the way to West Cork. Cut out the nonsense. Let them get off their butts and get the hell down and see the condition of the roads in my constituency are worse than appalling. They're worse than third world roads, and the rivers are bursting their banks out onto the road. And then the sight of a TII person on Sunday to see the condition of the roads on the main waterway into West Cork. And I'm telling you, this is what has to be done. We have to cut out the pencil pushers in this country, and we have to deliver for the people that drive the roads in great difficulty every day of their life because of the condition of them.
Minister, Navan has the longest waiting times in the country at the moment, with learners waiting up to 33 weeks just to receive an appointment. And actually, retests can mean anything up to 6 or 7 months wait. Now, Minister, is that acceptable to you? Because it's certainly not acceptable to the thousands of young people in my county who are desperate for a driver's licence so they can go about their business. As of April last year, there were 5,305 individuals on that waiting list, Minister. An incredibly high figure. And the reason for it is quite obvious. There is a shortage of testers able to actually go through those tests to reduce the numbers. In the whole of Meath, there are 3 testers currently, Minister. An incredible figure, and I'd like if you just would pay attention, maybe less to your notes, but a bit more to the debate that's actually happening here, if that's all right. Three testers can only actually. Excuse me, Minister, please, don't be getting annoyed now. It's usually you're a good man to heckle, but it'd be good just to listen too, you know. That's why you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, Minister, so you can listen twice as much as you speak. So, what I'm saying, if you only employ 3 testers for the whole of Meath, that means, at best, each tester can actually get through 40 tests. 120 is a total that the county can achieve. If you're doing at a rate of 120 a week, it's going to take up to 40 weeks just to get through the existing waiting list, Minister. Never mind the number of people who are going to join that waiting list in the interim. That's an incredible statistic. And, you know, the government have actually, I believe, caused some of the difficulty here. First of all, like many aspects of modern society, the delivery of services are grinding to a halt. Why? Because this government will not pay proper pay terms and conditions to workers within the public sector. If you won't pay people, Minister, especially when you have extremely high rents, people are not going to be able to do the job and they're going to leave the country and do the job elsewhere. Also, the government has got rid of temporary testers in recent times, which is a good policy in the long term, but it's had a destabilising effect in the short term, and it's actually reduced the number of people working in the area as well. There's an element in which a lot of testers are pulled out of testing sites and they're moved into other testing sites because maybe they have competencies on other type of vehicle testing, but that is causing instability within the testing centres as well, which is slowing the process down too. There is a system the government has. It's about cancellation when it invites young people to look at the websites to see what cancellations are happening on the testing. I know many young people who are actually on that website or the app all the time waiting for cancellation so that they can get in on it, and still they can't get a test for themselves, which is an incredible situation. So this is having a significant effect on people's lives, especially young people, because many young people in Meath are living in areas where there's practically little or no public transport. The vast majority, 80,000 people, travel to work by car in County Meath. We've been crying out for the rail line to be built from Navan to Dublin for at least 20 years, and your government has still not provided that. So on one level, you're refusing to deliver decent public transport to people, and on the other level, you're actually really making it difficult for people to get into their cars and drive to work. And we've seen the increase in tolls in recent times. We've seen the increase in excise on fuel in recent times. Minister, this is not just a philosophical question. This is not a theoretical question. These are real people trying to have real lives, trying to get to work, trying to study in college and trying to live their lives. And currently, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and the independent government at the moment are damaging these people's lives because they won't provide the testers and they won't provide the public transport. Gormagat the Cahiirlik.
Gormagat. Driving test waiting times have become a major issue across the country, and I've acknowledged from people speaking in different parts of the country that there's huge differences depending on your location. And the government itself has acknowledged since last year the need for significant restructuring of the RSA and its 90 million budget. But there's a lot of work to be done, with 72,000 learner drivers awaiting tests as of February this year, a rise of 10,000 over the last 3 months alone. So the Minister referenced a 22-week wait for a test, a figure which was last April 15 weeks. So we need a lot done. We need implementation of the service level agreement to 10 weeks as set out under Section 28 of the Road Safety Authority Act, and consequences if they can't deliver, as others have said. We need more driver testers, permanent positions especially. We need the promised reorganisation of the RSA to address the backlog in driving tests, including its own mandate, resourcing and programme of work.
We need to address the shortfall in the driving test centres across the country, more of them, spread more evenly, and to instruct the OPW and the RSA to urgently identify the suitable sites to fill the gaps. So I welcome the fact that you can no longer keep applying for a test and driving a learner permit indefinitely. Now you can renew your learner permit twice, and after that you must apply for a driving test or have unsuccessfully taken the driving test in the previous 2 years. That's all very welcome, but more needs to be done. I just want to focus on what others have said about transport. A lot of the time in rural areas in particular, but also in urban areas when you're trying to get to college or you're trying to get to work, the public transport system isn't fit for purpose. And as someone with a green background, I'd like to be able to say, yes, we have the public transport system that delivers, but Bus Connects is not fit for purpose. We know that. So we need to have alternatives for people. We need to have measures that would encourage people to be able to get their driver permit as early as possible. I just want to make a point in the remaining seconds about novice drivers. I do believe that once a person has got their test, it doesn't end there. Anecdotally, well, some of my rural colleagues have mentioned that roads are the issue. In urban areas with good roads, there are people with end plates that I've seen speed, break traffic lights, think they've got their test now and they can do what they like. So maybe we need refresher courses and tie that into the insurance costs. Gur Mogged.
Inish agus an Oireachtas tá Jay Blomaja ag an hour.
Gur Mogged Caherlic I dús bara cuireann ba buchas an heachta a dálaigh as ucht an rúnseo a curvós cór agus brunam a cagardagus bála thuair pátagar an sport an heachta seo. Can I commend Deputy Daly for putting the motion before us? As members will be aware, government are not opposing the motion, and all of us on all sides of the House share the frustration and the annoyance in terms of the difficulties being experienced by people in our constituencies, neighbours, family members and friends. And I want to thank the members for the contributions in this debate on National Driver Testing Service today. I'm conscious of the disparity of test delays. Deputy Daly, you'll appreciate my next comment. My late mother was a recipient of the Sylvester Barrett licence, and as we heard earlier, unacceptable that we have a situation where people are experiencing inordinate delays, and we cannot go back to those days where we hand out driving licences like what happened before. The depth of feeling on this issue is one I understand fully. I have it in my own office. I have with people every day of the week. All of us are in agreement, Caherlic, that we need to deliver decisively on the issue of service provision and the long-standing issue in terms of the reliable, high-quality driving testing service that is available in our state, regardless of where you live. Not only is achieving the 10-week target time important in terms of learner drivers' experience of the service, it's also a vital component of delivering on our road safety strategy and the ambition to halve road deaths and serious injuries this decade, ensuring that all of our drivers are well trained, equipped to deal with the challenges of modern driving makes us all feel safer on the roads. As Minister O'Brien has outlined in his opening remarks, the population of our country has increased significantly. This has put additional demand on the driving testing service, with now a record number of applicants received our last year. And while the operation of the service is the statutory remit of the RSA, Government have sought to support them in meeting this demand through a number of staffing sanctions in recent years, most recently the 70 additional driving testers sanctioned on a permanent basis last autumn, with a sanctioned headcount of 200 today, and there has been a doubling of the staffing sanction in just over 2 years, reflecting our commitment to addressing this issue. Prior to this, members will be aware that the RSA requested sanction for 75 testers on a temporary basis, which was approved by the then Minister of the Department in March 2023. As already outlined by Minister O'Brien, the temporary sanction at the time was the correct one, ensuring that the permanent staffing decisions were not taken while the service was experiencing a post-pandemic distortion and creating capacity to deal with immediate demand, while a longer-term assessment of capacity requirements was conducted. Under this temporary sanction, significant progress was made between August of 2023 and April of last year, with the halving from 30 to 15 weeks. Progress that was made under the previous sanction before the loss of testing capacity gives us confidence and hope that the additional capacity now entering the service on a permanent basis will deliver improved waiting times on a sustained basis going forward. and that is the key point, members, will deliver on a permanent basis for all people. The RSA is confident that a permanent position now on offer will be tracked and retain more testers than was the case for the temporary sanction, and the fact that it remains in place permanently will allow the RSA to fill vacancies that arise and in response to demand up to the ceiling of 200 on an ongoing basis going forward. Members will, I hope, be impressed by the fact that interest in the competition was quite high, with up to 1,400 people applying at the initial stage, with over 300 making it through to the final driving assessment stage. And I'm informed by the RSA in advance of this debate tonight that they intend to commence training the first tranche of new recruits early next month in March, and onboarding will continue with additional trainees over the next couple of months. I hope and expect that we will see sustained progress towards the 10-week wait time in the months ahead, and the RSA have been required to put in place a plan to achieve that target as soon as possible. The additional capacity will help address the systemic mismatch between supply and demand that has developed in recent years as our population has grown. However, I think it's also important to acknowledge the steps taken by the RSA and efforts by individual testers to mitigate the impact on people to the greatest extent possible while the current recruitment campaign is ongoing. There was an extensive voluntary working of overtime by driver testers last year, and I thank them for that and commend them to help meet demand during 2024, and this is continuing, including at weekends. To support this, the RSA ran an incentivisation programme from overtime during last year, and a similar offer is under consideration for this year. Deputy O'Flynn members raised the issue of no-shows, and the RSA have introduced an IT system improvements to maximise the number of test slots utilised and reduce the amount of tests lost to cancellation and no-shows. Once a person has been invited to book a test, they can now book slots released at short notice following a cancellation on the My Road Safety portal, and such slots are added every day. And the new system has seen the overall percentage of testing slots decreased from 95% to over 98%. Finally, deputies may wish to note that the RSA has transparently published monthly information on the driving test service on the CSO website, including a breakdown of waiting times and distribution of testing capacity by test centres. Members have made reference to the RSA, and there is one final element of the opposition motion that I would like to address and touch upon, and that relates to the call for government to conduct an urgent review of the capacity of the RSA to deliver the driving testing service. And I want to commend Anne Graham, the new chairperson today, and to wish her well. As members are aware, such a review was actually commissioned at the beginning of 2024 and presented to government last November. The core recommendation emerging from that review is that the RSA will be split into two separate and independent bodies responsible for respectively the provision of customer service, such as driver testing, and the delivery of wider public interest work, such as road safety campaigns and education. This reform will take time to deliver, but detailed work on how it will be implemented is underway and will be presented to the government by Minister O'Brien at the appropriate juncture. In the long term, this radical restructuring of the organisation will help ensure a singular focus on delivering high-quality public services within the responsible body, while similarly allowing the public interest body to focus on public interest work, and that is why the motion tonight before us is very important. It will mark a transformation in how road safety interventions have been delivered over the past decade, and I believe can make a significant contribution to the achievement of our 2030 targets under the road safety strategy in the coming years. To conclude, government recognises the significant impact that long waiting times have in terms of driving tests on people across our country, particularly those residing in rural areas, as we've heard in the debate, where public transport may be limited. It is important, however, that we do not compromise testing standards and instead ensure the recruitment delivers sufficient testing capacity of an appropriate standard to support safe road use. As the current recruitment campaign is currently well advanced, additional capacity will enter the system in the coming months, and we expect to see wait times progressively reduced towards the target of at least the level of 10 weeks. As Minister O'Brien outlined, seeing tangible progress on this issue, which is impacting on all of our constituents, is a foremost priority of him as a Minister and in the Department. Can I again thank Deputy Daly for bringing this motion before the House and for the contributions of all members during the debate. Can I just make the point, that as a practising constituency public representative, I understand fully the annoyance, the frustration and the delay and the consequences of that. And I thank Deputy Daly for bringing the motion to the House, and as members will know, government are not opposing the motion. Gramargad Caherlock.
Inis tá J-Bomajig Sinn Féin agus Tomajig Tosnu le Choctaw O'Sullivan.
Minister, there's over 8,000 learner drivers in total are languishing on waiting lists in Wicklow and Wexford. Some are waiting over 8 months, and this is totally unacceptable. And then after that, a young person could be fleeced with exorbitant insurance costs of sometimes up to €2,000 to €3,000, which is very frustrating. However, then comes another real shock, and that is trying to navigate and drive safely on County Wexford's rural roads network, which is literally disintegrating before our eyes, especially after the recent bad weather. Now, after the Celtic Tiger years, the government reduced roads funding dramatically to County Wexford, which left a €67 million hole in the County Wexford's rural roads budget. Now, even the 2021 storm works, including bridge repairs, are only being completed now. Across the state, there's 15% on average of the roads are in poor condition. However, in County Wexford's case, this rockets up to 28%, almost double. And the roads, I suppose, in Wexford, going by technical surveys, have been left behind for 30 years, and that's from official road surveys by engineers' reports and the NOAC report also. And a technical analysis, Minister, done by Wexford County Council estimated that €194 million is now needed to address the crisis with County Wexford's rural roads, which is a massive safety issue. Now, the local authority simply cannot bridge this gap with its own resources, and it's certainly not fair on motorists who are having their cars wrecked on such terrible roads. It's also a very serious road safety issue, whether you're a young learner driver or an experienced one, having to swerve, zigzag across the rural roads to avoid hitting huge potholes, some even craters. You could almost wash a child in some of them. They're absolutely massive, and broken verges, while at the same time meeting oncoming traffic. So you can see how such a danger that would be. So, Minister, in a parliamentary question recently, I called on you to start allocating funding to the counties' two counties based on road condition rather than road length at present. And the response I received was rather ridiculous. It was basically, the Minister said that it would disincentivise county councils from repairing bad roads if they were to allocate funding based on road condition. Now, I think this is absolutely nonsensical and unacceptable to everybody, and it's something I won't be letting rest in this chamber. And as with the driver licence issue, this too is a huge matter for the Road Safety Authority. And finally, I'm just calling on the Minister to immediately intervene with emergency funding for County Wexford to deal with the disintegrating road condition, because no other country in Europe has to put up with this, no other county in Ireland indeed puts up with this, so why should we in Wexford? So I need this to be addressed immediately as an emergency safety issue. Thank you.
Mágad a lascin chorla agus go Oireachtas as the fosnú a lascin chorla. Ara, I suppose I want to reiterate what has been said in the chamber here tonight. The fact that we have so many, especially young people, who are waiting ridiculously long periods of time in order to access a driving test. And in Galway, for example, the waiting list is over 3,000. 3,000 people who are waiting to get a driving test so that they can commute for work. And a big issue that I've come across now is commuting for housing. These people are waiting now for over 7 months, although we're told that it should be a 10-week period. People are waiting for over 7 months. And Minister, as you'll know, at this very moment in time, there's no HAP properties available in Galway City in the HAP limits, which means that so many people have to move out into more rural areas to access housing. These people now are waiting. I've met with one woman this week who's waiting 6 months in order to try and get a driving test, which would enable her to go further out to try and access housing while she is currently homeless. There's young people who are studying who need the car in order to commute, who are waiting on their driving test. One woman contacted me today to say that she was supposed to get it in February. It was pushed back to March. She expects it to be pushed back even further, while all the same time not able to commute by herself into university or access her third level education easily, because of course, as we know, in the west of Ireland there are huge issues in terms terms of access to public transport, and at the same time she's also having to pay extra in terms of insurance. Another man told me that he had put in waiting for 3 months. He noticed that he still hadn't heard anything back with regards to his driving test, and then he discovered that they had absolutely no record of him ever applying for a driving test. And that was only the first in a litany of issues that he had in terms of accessing that driving test. We hear an awful lot from government that they're going to sort this out. It's high time that it is sorted out, but let this motion be a first step to doing so.
Margaret, the difficulty that people right across the state in accessing a driving test, particularly those who rely on the test centre in Tala, is something that I've been raising in this chamber for not just for years, but for several days. I remember raising the fact that the waiting list in Tala had passed the 5,000 and urging that immediate action be taken before things completely spiralled out of control. That was with Minister Shane Ross, and it was back in 2020. I remember raising the matter with the Minister Eamon Ryan when the number passed 10,000. And here we are now, and there are over 18,000 people waiting in Tala. That's a population the size of Clonmel or Malahide, and all waiting on a test in one centre. Will I be raising this at Easter when it becomes 20,000? I think it's a fair question. I want answers in relation to when you're going to clear this. When I asked Eamon Ryan about, he was talking about new testers, he couldn't tell me, would he be able to deal with the background. So clearly there's a need for additional test centre in South Dublin. Dunleary was the second highest when Eamon Ryan was there. Population has exploded, as we heard, in the last 20 years, but they're even new towns since the last centre was opened. As the population grows, the provision of centres must grow with it. Otherwise, there will be no bottlenecks, and that's just not common sense. Additional testers and centres are welcome, but that only allows us to tread water. We've had temporary testers in the past, and that only slowed the rising numbers. It didn't do anything to break it into the backlog. So we should encourage the use of public transport as the first option. That's not always a practical solution, as you've heard tonight. If people want to get a job in Intel, for instance, it might be a half an hour drive on a good day. Well, it'll take about 2.5 hours to get from Tallaght. There's no direct route. And that's the problem right across. So we have to stop this discrimination against drivers. So, Minister, give us answers of how you're going to solve this, maybe, when you get a chance.
Thank you, Deputy Daly. Margaret, I want to thank all the contributors who spoke tonight, and I acknowledge that the government is not going to be opposing the motion. But it's unfortunate that this is not the first time that this issue has been raised, and I agree, obviously, that when the government says that the figures are unacceptable. But it must be deeply frustrating for anybody listening in or watching in tonight, any of the 72,000 people that are on the waiting lists, any of the people that are waiting 6 to 8 months for a driving test, and the thousands of people even in my own county of Kerry, the people who are paying exorbitant over-the-top insurance costs, people who are paying huge amounts for extra driving tests while they are waiting to get on and have their cases heard. The returned immigrants who are returning from, for example, the States where they have a full driving licence, who are awaiting a licence for work so they can take up employment here, but their licences are not recognised. And still, all the times that you've been going over to St. Patrick's Day, can you not sort this small thing out in some sort of an agreement with the United States? People who cannot access employment, such as crucial frontline employment like paramedics and people who are ambulance drivers and a whole lot. People who are trying to access courses that they require in order to take up employment and other frontline services. But it must be frustrating for them to hear some of the excuses that have been said tonight. COVID was raised. I think there was mention by Mr. Darragh O'Brien of the post-pandemic, the public health measures, the social distancing and the pandemic era. To be hearing that from them when numbers have increased by 60% since 2022 when the restrictions ended. It also must be frustrating to hear the Minister say that it's not the government's problem, but the RSA haven't dealt with the situation. You're in government, you're the ones that should have been sorting it out over the past number of years. And it reminds me of the delays in security in Dublin Airport when staff were laid off and it became so difficult then to hire full-time staff. And that's what we're calling on the government to do in essence. There was also frustration from our side in hearing Minister O'Brien asking for solutions and saying that there was a problem with solutions being offered. We're asking for more full-time instructors, we're asking for more resources to put into it, and we're asking for the government to take this matter seriously once and for all.
Like, share, and subscribe, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.